process. And so we're actually very interested in getting some feedback. The best way is through the discussion where you can type in questions. I'm going to dive in. Let's see if I can manage my technology appropriately. Let's see. Get the presentation. And it should be up now. And I have this bizarre multiple thing I'm seeing. And here we go. So we want to give you an overview of this project that we've just started on the role of authentic STEM learning experiences in developing competencies. Yes?
It's not the presentation.
It's not the presentation.
No.
Because on my computer.
It was just it was basically us, me.
Okay. So let's see. I did exactly what I did before. Application window.
There. Now it's coming.
Sorry about that, guys. Amy, thanks for stopping me. So this is a study focused on using authentic STEM learning experiences to develop interesting competencies for computing. We're in the early stages of it. And we wanted to start by giving you some background on the Academies. Not everyone knows who we are or what we do. And I'll give you some of that background, and then I'll hand it off to Amy. And then we really do want to have time for some discussion, both questions and feedback from folks in the audience. So the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine has been around for over 150 years. We are not a government agency, but we do a lot of our work for the government, and we have a special relationship to the federal government. We were actually established by Abraham Lincoln and then expanded under Teddy Roosevelt. We consist of 3 honorific societies and then an operating arm, which is what Amy and I are part of, the National Research Council internally. And we do a lot of the programmatic work where we issue guidance. So one of the ways that we do that is to bring together committees in all areas of science and technology and give advice to the nation. It's really beyond the federal government. It includes the nation and the public. So Amy and I represent the Board on Science Education at the Academies, which is a standing body of folks, an interdisciplinary group of people who help steer a portfolio of work in what I like to call cradle to gray science education and STEM education, which means learning about science, learning about STEM wherever it might happen, in and out of school, at all ages. And we bring together experts of all stripes. And for us, expertise doesn't just mean academics. It also means people who are on the ground doing the work and policymakers to dig into issues around science and STEM education. So our mission in Academies is to provide evidence-based guidance for practice and policy, drawing on research. And we also identify future directions for research. So to me, our sweet spot is this connection point between research, policy, and practice. And in the case of the study we're going to talk to you about today, I think it's sort of in a perfect space because we know policy is advancing around giving kids access to computing education. The research base is just beginning to really deepen, but there are a lot of people on the ground doing a lot of really important work in practice that we want to leverage. So some of the way that we do our work, gather input from the community and guidance from our board members. So we constantly have our ears to the ground about what's currently going on in the world. And our board is a set of people designed to sort of tap different constituencies. We also convene what's called consensus committees. This is the kind of project we're talking to you today about, where we identify a topic or a set of questions and we pull together the right interdisciplinary group to respond to those questions. And then we review the evidence as well as expert practice, develop some conclusions and recommendations based on that evidence, and then we push out the recommendations to key stakeholders. So that's the kind of project we're talking about today. We also hold public meetings and workshops to bring together different stakeholders to help them create new networking. And also to broaden a conversation around important issues. So, for example, as part of the consensus study that we're going to talk to you about, we held a public workshop, and part of that was to bring in more voices and to elevate the topic around authentic STEM and computing. So that gives you just a little flavor of who we are and how we're situated. And I'm going to hand it over to Amy, though I'm going to keep doing the slides, so don't forget to tell me to advance them, Amy, and have her talk about the study itself. And I just wanted to emphasize, while we're in the process of doing these consensus committees, the reports of these committees are rigorously peer reviewed, and we're in a stage with this study where that report has not been peer reviewed yet, and we're only allowed to talk about the specific conclusions and recommendations once it's cleared review. So we can't tell you the specifics, and that's why we're in a mode where we want to share the work with you and actually use this as an opportunity to get input while you can still inform the way that final report looks. So Amy, over to you.
So thank you, Heidi. And as she said, it's a consensus report. We do have a very long link there that will take you to the project page. So if you are interested in learning more about this study, I can always make sure to copy that link into the discussion section, and you can always visit that page for updates. It is a project that's funded by Google and the Grable Foundation, so we're very appreciative of them being willing to sponsor this work. And so what I was hoping to do was give you a sense of who the committee is, and what the statement of task looks like. That's their scope of work and some of the ideas that they've been thinking about, but then open it up for a broader conversation with you. So next slide, please. Our committee consists of a broad range of folks. And so what we do when we bring these consensus committees together is bring experts from different fields and different areas with lots of different perspectives so that we have an issue to really pull together a broad range of literatures to really reflect on what the evidence says so that we can provide robust evidence-based guidance to whoever happens to be the constituency of the report. And so Barbara Means from Digital Promise is the chair of this particular committee, and we have a lot of great scholars and practitioners who represent many different communities, such as maker education, folks who are really attuned to science and mathematics, who are doing work in computer science and computational thinking, in a range of different settings, whether that be thinking about connected learning spaces like Mimi Uto at University of California, or Mega, who brings sort of our library perspective. And so this committee has come together to really weigh in on what the evidence is. And so if, next slide, what we've done so far is this study actually began its work in June of 2019. And we've had about 5 meetings so far over the course of that year. 3 of those meetings were public sessions, and that's where we engage, as Heidi said, with stakeholders from different groups to provide either testimony or evidence or practical guidance on particular issues, some of which I'll share in just a few moments. And the ultimate goal is to have the report out by the end of 2020. So this provides a really great opportunity to start engaging with lots of different individuals so that we can ensure that we're providing the best guidance for whomever we hope takes up this report. And so all of our work is guided by what's called a statement of task. Next slide. And what this is the set of questions that the committee is asked to really take up and really dig into what the evidence is around this. And in this case, the committee was asked to examine the evidence on learning and teaching using authentic, open-ended pedagogical approaches and learning experiences, particularly in grades K through 12, in both formal and informal settings. So already there, you can imagine what the scope of this work is when we're talking about, in this case, you'll see that it's about STEM, but it's STEM in schools and outside of schools in the K through 12 space, but really narrowing in on what it means for work to be authentic and open-ended. And so with the ultimate goal of trying to understand what role this plays in cultivating the interest and foundational knowledge and competencies that are necessary for pursuing careers in computing. So granted, while we've been looking at the evidence around STEM learning experiences, the end goal is what does it mean to have a career in computing? Next slide. And then importantly, we were asked to give particular attention to what it means to engage youth and learners from typically underrepresented communities in computing fields. As we know, this is an area of vast underrepresentation by particular groups, women and those from minority communities. And so this is a really important issue that the committee has thought long and hard about. Next slide. And so as we've been doing our work, there's been a number of issues that the committee has really found particularly intriguing to spend some time thinking about. And of course, given the emphasis on reaching underrepresented communities, we've spent a lot of time really trying to understand what those issues mean for equitable access to learning opportunities, whether that's in or outside of school. The role of competitions and hobbies for reaching diverse populations. So we recognize that not every student is going, or learner I should say, is going to have an opportunity in a particular setting. And what are some of the sort of outside places where people really have an interest-driven role in some of these learning opportunities? What can they tell us about how to reach diverse populations? I think most of us come to the work knowing when we see the word authentic, there's a lot of ways in which we can think about authenticity. And interestingly, if you look at sort of what's been happening in the field, there's been discussions about when you look at national standards like science and mathematics, where they ask for the work to be done to sort of give learners a flavor for what it means to do the work as a scientist. That's where the practices come from in some of the national standards that elevates some forms of authenticity. So it's authentic to the practitioner or to the scientist. Well, what does that mean for building in opportunities that might be more culturally relevant or personally authentic to the learner? And so we've had a lot of discussion, in particular in some open sessions. So if you're interested, you should take a look at the workshop. Those videos are posted on our website, where we really dug into what it means for an experience to be authentic, and authentic for whom. We also spent a lot of time, given that our report is supposed to be evidence-based, thinking about what it is that we actually know about the outcomes. What is the strength of the evidence that actually exists in the field, so that we can, to our last point, really be thoughtful about what it means to design and implement these experiences to ensure things like equity and the range of settings, all of which have important implications for equitable access, what it means to reach underrepresented learners, how it has come that some learners may not feel that computing is for them. And so how can we reach those students to provide them for opportunities so that they can actually decide if they are someone who wants to engage in computing. And I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions. So we've posed 2 questions that we would really love to get some feedback and ideas from. And those 2 questions are, how have others approached issues of design? So either you or someone else, what are some of the design issues that have been of most importance to you? But more importantly, what specific guidance would be most useful to you when considering the role of STEM learning for computing, whether that be a way to think about designing an experience or what it means for implementation, what that might mean for different settings, but also if you could get this information, what medium would you want this information? Is it something that would be useful to have in a video? Would it be helpful to have an infographic? So we welcome all range of ideas and suggestions. And right now we would really like to open the floor to actually engage in some meaningful dialogue. Oh, I just realized that there was a question about the presentation. I guess the slide was not coming through very good.
Which one? All of them?
I guess it was not adjusted well in the viewing window, so folks couldn't see the whole slide. Yeah.
I don't know how to do anything about that because it looks fine on my computer.
Yeah, I'm very sorry about that. We can actually make the presentation available as slides, and so I'll do that as a handout. So I'll do that in just a second.
Yeah, because I could show it in a different way that maybe was better fitting. But we welcome questions about the study itself, which you can, based on Amy's comments, you could ask questions or responses to these discussion questions that Amy raised. It's not clear to me what's visible and what's not of the slide, so I'm not sure what people have been able to see or not see. Maybe I will stop sharing. Amy, are there any questions coming in? I can't see them while I'm sharing. I'm thinking of stopping the sharing.
I am looking. So we have a question about, in the classroom, I always use relevant real life examples for the students so that they begin to see their community differently. Yeah, that is a great suggestion. And it is something that we as a committee and actually as a board have spent a lot of time really thinking about using relevant real life examples. And then we saw what specific suggestions do you have for promoting equitable access? And that's a really interesting question. We've been looking into the evidence around, in particular for computing, sort of what it means either in terms of who does and does not actually have access to equipment, what that means for the design of experiences. And so there's a lot of robust learning that can happen when you're using quote unquote unplugged activities. And we've heard from a lot of different organizations and groups about the kinds of activities that they're doing unplugged that would promote things like computational thinking. And so I can, one of the examples that we received was a program from the Seattle Public Library. I'm completely blanking on the name right now, but they were doing some activities where they were essentially doing a coding activity using Post-it notes. And so they're engaging in the kinds of computational thinking that you would do if the program's live and online and you're doing some coding, but the learners were not actually doing any sorts of coding. So there are some low tech ways, and so I think one of the I can't actually speak about any of the actual conclusions and recommendations that the report is making yet, but from the conversations with respect to equitable access, it's being mindful and explicit about the goals of the program and making those clear. So if there is, and this came out in the workshop we had, if there is space to ensure that you're being mindful of how to engage youth, simple things like making sure youth actually have transportation and access to those programs, whether that means changing the hours so that it can be accessible, whether or not that means one of the most interesting examples we had was where the conversation was around how families needed to be part of that learning experience too. And so how to, when you're thinking about that, recognize that in some cases to ensure equitable access, you need to have the family also be able to participate in that activity as well. And I would say that for me, like I knew that, but really hearing someone explain the implications of that was really profound.
I don't see another question, but I was also wanted to raise, when Amy was showing the list of considerations that the committee has had and thinking through the notion of outcomes, one of the things that the committee has really grappled with is what does it mean to be supporting development of interest and competencies for computing? So really thinking broadly about what computing means, pushing beyond just thinking of computer science and particularly the way computer science has been defined in schools, to be thinking forward toward what is computing going to look like, what are those fundamental competencies. So the committee has had some discussions about that that have been really interesting. I see a question about when the conclusions and recommendations will be released. The aim is to have the report finished and through our peer review process by the end of the year. So they'll hopefully December 2020 is the latest time that the report will be available. So, and we certainly will find ways to loop back with this community and make sure that folks have access to that report when it comes out. We could find ways to have conversations with some of you folks. And another question, Amy, I don't know if you see it.
I'm looking at it now. Binders are being used.
Mm-hmm. Great suggestions.
Yeah. Yeah, and these are some of the points that the committee is working on right now, is making sure that those are really addressed in the report. In particularly, the point made around inherent bias is important. I think the point around giving some agency and voice to underserved is, I imagine, probably an undercurrent of the entire report. And so it will be, I think it might not point to all of the sort of the examples that you have here, but there will definitely be flavors of that, mostly because of the emphasis on computing in this case.
And thanks for the question, Al. Good to see you virtually. I think another point, the committee has recognized, and this has come through in some of the public discussions, that the evidence base specifically around computing and computer science and the kinds of authentic experiences that support that domain is relatively thin. And so it's been really interesting to see how much the community of practice, folks who are out there really trying stuff, filling a very clear need in a whole range of ways, including maker spaces, after school clubs, in libraries and museums, but that the research community in some ways hasn't caught up with what's happening on the ground. And so it creates a really interesting tension for a committee like this that's providing evidence-based guidance to understand that there's so much great activity, and how do we capitalize on the sort of knowledge in use, expert practice knowledge that may not yet have made it to peer review. And so it's been a really interesting recognition of how much people on the ground are doing phenomenal work, and how does the committee leverage that?
Yeah, and that's been especially true in some of our review of informal spaces, but not just of the spaces broadly, but of what it means for particular geographies. So what is the activity that's happening in more rural settings where we know some of these opportunities are really happening in libraries, but perhaps those libraries aren't actually publishing some, sort of impact reports on the effectiveness of their programs, or what their designs look like, or the kinds of, really nuanced discussion of the kinds of students that are being reached has been a little, hard to uncover. We've had a lot of great work that we've surfaced, and we'll be able to point to where some of the sort of the limitations or the gaps are. But that's something that we've been looking towards.
And I've definitely been in touch with Karen Peterson, absolutely. The After School Alliance also is a great source for a lot of this, and we certainly have them in the conversations. I would love to hear if people have any notions. We're at a stage right now where we certainly want to be responsive to input, and if there are things you feel like, I really hope the committee says X, or I really hope the committee give guidance on Y, we'd love to have you put those into the discussion box, because we really are working on fine-tuning doing the last digestion of the evidence and creating the, finalizing conclusions and recommendations. And we want this to be useful to the community. So if there's things you really wish it would say, I think a couple have come out, particularly related to equitable implementation and being culturally sustaining. We'd love to have you mention them in the discussion window. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That by itself is really helpful to make sure that we have an eye towards that as we start to wrap things up. It's great when groups are well connected, because that's who we want to reach. We want to have broad impact. We can't just assume that people are going to look to the national academies to give them this information. And so the committee themselves are pretty well connected, but these suggestions are great. If there's other ideas of places we might want to look towards, but also, as Heidi was saying, if there's, I wish the report would say this, that would really help in making sure that we've shaped our conclusions and recommendations so that it is actually helpful.
I don't see more commentary. Amy, I don't know if there's anything else you want to share about the substance of the report. The timing is we're finalizing it this summer, and as I said, it'll come out the end of the year. And we really do plan to do a whole circuit. We're developing a whole communication sort of engagement plan. And the suggestion of the National Girls Collaborative is right on, and among others. We really want to make sure we're hitting the informal community as well as K-12, because we're really looking at a balance here, which is sometimes unusual, that you're really seeing both communities, both settings discussed in the same report. At least for us it is. I don't know, Amy, about an HBCU representative on the committee.
I don't
think so.
I don't think so. And I don't think that was an intentional oversight. I think we were focusing more on individuals, not that just tap different communities, but was looking at sort of the implications for youth more. But but that's an excellent suggestion about HBCUs.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me, it's a good question for us, because when we do work in higher ed, we're very intentional about including MSIs and particularly HBCUs. But in K-12, I haven't given it the same level of thought. So it's a really good reminder that we need to be thinking about that in K-12. No, Barbara, perfect. It's a really good comment, and it's a good feedback, particularly as we move forward, not just with this project, but in general, when we're making our committee. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I would say that was an emphasis. So we had a report come out earlier this year that was on the teacher workforce, and that was in particular for K-12, and that definitely factored in heavily into that study. But yeah, it's probably an issue we should make sure we're attending to for all studies.
Yep, that's a great comment.
Yeah, and I will say I'm looking at Catherine's comment about that it's going to cover both formal and informal experiences, and that I see as challenging, but having a lot of great potential, because when we're talking about computing, especially how prevalent computers and computing is to our lives just broadly, I mean, our kids are not going to, unless something drastically happens, maybe like a pandemic, our kids are going to have lots of exposure to computing. It's part of our lives now, and really trying to think as forward about sort of what that could look like in 20 and 30 years has, sort of pushed the committee to really be mindful of, not just thinking about computer science, because computer science could radically be very different in 20 years, given changes in technology. And so the committee has been really thinking hard about that. But what that means is that when we look at particular bodies of literature, what kinds of experiences youth are getting and what those experiences tell us about whether it's going to develop an interest, an identity, a foundational knowledge, or a competency, what have you, has been really illuminating. And then when they start to take what they've learned, say, in the classroom, they're taking a computer science class, for example, do they then start seeking out other opportunities? What programs may have really helped get them into different settings? Do we see anything that might be different when a kid has an earlier experience versus something that happens a little bit later? And so through the whole process, one of the things that we especially built into our workshop was trying to uncover the voice of those learners in the experiences. And so to the extent that we can have sort of youth comment on sort of what had shaped their learning or their interest or their identity towards computing, we've tried to build that in, or at least consider it as much as possible. The Zero Robotics middle school program. Yeah, I'll make sure that we've looked at that one. There's been so many programs that we've been trying to noodle on and look at, and it feels like more and more keep coming up. And unfortunately, some of them do end up sort of going away, which is also a bit disconcerting and has not helped us when looking for particular outcomes when a program looks particularly promising. But because of some unknown factor or some unknown reason, a program's had to dissolve or has gotten usurped under a different umbrella. Makes it harder to look at some of these sort of long-term impacts. The easiest one for us to start to look at is Scratch, which is not too surprising. But what role does some of the robotics work tell us, in particular around competitions, and how do some of those activities actually bring in particular youth, but also how might they exclude youth, even if it's sort of done in an unintentional way. So it's been a lot of great ideas. We've looked to some extent at parental support. We've been focusing on sort of the pedagogical aspects of some of the open-ended experiences, so we might not cover as much about that particular issue as we would like, but it's definitely acknowledged that parents and parental support are one of the many players and factors that can sort of promote a student's or learner's interest in computing.
But there isn't, and Amy will correct me if I'm wrong about this.
Yeah.
But the committee is not doing as deep a dive in some of the more sort of home-based kids doing it on their own in a purely interest-driven way, where you might be parents selecting access or something. Most of what the committee is looking at is something that's a little more designed, so it's a little more programmatic.
Correct.
So you won't see the purely sort of home-based, family-based kinds of engagement, of which there's a lot, especially online.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah. Now, Amy, what's our time? I don't remember our end time.
I thought it was now, but I'm not entirely sure how.
How we know that. Yeah.
But we're welcome to keep taking questions until someone, kicks us off.
LAUSD. It's so the committee
Amy,
is. Yep.
Am I there?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you both, Amy and Heidi, for this very valuable information, and we're looking forward to reading the report.
Great.
But you could finish answering the question you started. I just popped in because Kelly's on another presentation as well.
Perfect.
So I will say the shift to learning this spring and the fact that so much has gone virtual and will likely be that way in the fall, the committee is just moving so quickly, and the committee likely will not be able to take it on board completely, but they've absolutely looked at virtual offerings. And so that will at least be in there. But this sort of incredible shift we've had over the past few months, as people have been heroic in their response to giving kids engaging learning online, we just won't be able to fully incorporate that into the report.
Correct.
So, all right. Well, thank you all very much. It's so great to interact with everyone.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to continuing the work.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.